What comes to mind when you hear the name Chad? Allow me to guess. Charming, charismatic, and facial perfection. But there's something more. White. Yes, that's the stereotype. White skin, westernized, Eurocentric. Yet, I see a world of color. It's time to redefine what it means to be a Chad. In a world with hundreds of unique phenotypes where only a fraction of the world's population is of Caucasian descent, it's a grievous mistake that people believe that their ethnicity must align with the conventional Chad to succeed. Welcome to Chadify, where every ethnicity possesses the potential for Chadification. If you want to get your face analyzed with looks-maxing suggestions and Chadification done to your own unique circumstance, taking your ethnicity into consideration, check out the link in the description, chadify.me. Approximately 200,000 years ago, the modern human species, Homo sapiens, emerged in sub-Saharan Africa. Today, we embark on a journey that commences on the very soil that birthed human existence. We will not only explore each ethnicity, but also consider how to enhance one's appearance based on it. Each path here signifies the unique routes humans took as they traveled across Earth, color-coded by each continent. The countdown at the bottom of the screen indicates the current year being displayed. Our individual genetics and heritage play a significant role in shaping our physical appearance. Ethnicity matters because people from diverse backgrounds exhibit varying traits, necessitating tailored looks-maxing protocols. Standard rating criteria like the conventional Chad rating system faces challenges when applied to individuals from distant regions outside of Europe. In fact, even across Asia, faces can display strikingly different appearances. One size doesn't fit all, and at Chadify, we recognize this reality. In our previous installments of this series, we delved into the realm of male facial attractiveness across the continents of Africa, Europe, and Oceania. Rather than simplistically categorizing these regions as single races, solely defined by the labels of black and white, I developed a more accurate approach that recognizes the diverse array of phenotypes present on each continent. But what even is a phenotype? Well, a phenotype is a set of observable characteristics of an organism, which is determined by genetics and influenced by the environment. When two or more different phenotypes exist in the same population of a species, the species is now called polymorphic. We are, as humans, polymorphic. There are 4 different types of phenotypic traits. Morphological phenotypic traits are physical traits that are observable. In humans, traits like height, eye color, and other facial features. We're concerned with morphology. There are 17 morphological phenotypic traits involved in our analysis, each varying significantly across phenotypes. And there are hundreds of unique phenotypes, but we will be focusing on the main 45 of them. As you can see, this complexity surpasses the conventional categorization of a handful of races. In this video, we transition to our exploration of Asia and find a parallel to our observations back in Africa, Europe, and Oceania. Here too, faces are frequently oversimplified, but this time under the umbrella term Asian. We're gonna zoom in to our first phenotype. Wow. There he is. In my opinion, facial attractiveness is objective in aggregate. This means that while it is entirely subjective from person to person, given a large enough sample size, it becomes predictive by nature. This is the system that I implemented to create and define Chads. The following relationships must be satisfied. First of all, facial averageness. Morphing images from various individuals within a specific group can create a representation of facial averageness for that region. And a great example is what this guy did here. These are 6 different individuals which averaged together to create this guy. Objectively, from my my own analysis, the guy in the middle is the most attractive by far out of the 6 of them, yet all 6 of those guys are not attractive. So when you put it all together, you end up with a very attractive face. So I can go and I can target a specific phenotype and average together hundreds of faces to create a great looking, attractive face from the region. However, that is not enough to fully tap out facial attractiveness, which leads us to chatification, modifying an averaged face by enhancing its dimorphic traits and overall aesthetic markers results in a chatified phenotype. And that is how I created 45 and counting Chad phenotypes of the world. Our initial phenotype is the Veddid phenotype Chad. Similar to the Australid of Australia, the Veddid phenotype likely diverged from one of the earliest out of Africa migrations before the split between Europeans and East Asians. Relict groups of the Vedda primarily reside in the eastern parts of Sri Lanka, with only a few hundred individuals remaining unmixed. While the Vedda culture and phenotype face the threat of extinction, admixture with this group is relatively common across various parts of the island. In fact, genetic studies indicate their influence is present among southern Indians and extends across southern Asia, reflecting ancient connections between these populations. There are no globally recognized celebrities with a predominantly Veddid phenotype, as the Vedda people live in small, traditional, forest-dwelling communities in Sri Lanka. Hence my choice to showcase a random good-looking male from the region. The Vedda people indigenous to Sri Lanka are outside of the caste system entirely, which we will be delving into later in our Indid and Indo-Melanid phenotypes. The Vedda are often viewed as a marginalized group subject to stereotyping and limited socioeconomic mobility. Here's a photo of the Kiri Koraha dance. You can see this if you join a guided tour with Digoda and Krish in Dabana Vedda village. Alright, into the Veddid phenotype analysis. First of all, they have a medium to dark brown skin tone. Secondly, they have a high quantity of body hair. Thirdly, the Veddid is known for having wavy to curly hair texture. And additionally, this hair is black in color. The Veddid phenotype has dark brown eyes and eye dimensions of 3.2 to 1, which are deep set almond eye proportioned. They do have some genetics which are similar to many of the Australoid groups of Oceania, and this is likely part of the attribution to them having deep set eyes. Additionally, the Veddid phenotype rarely has eye folds, an average eye spacing of 106% of one eye width apart, with an ES ratio on average of 0.475. Additionally, they have a nasal index of 80, meaning that they have a mesorhine or medium nose width. The Veddid phenotype has moderate projection of their nose. Showcase here is the Vedda tribe. You can see how the projection of the nose is not astronomically high, but it isn't that low either. And they are mildly hypsocranic, meaning that they are slightly tall in skull height. The Veddid phenotype is dolichocephalic, meaning that they are deep skulled, and they are mesoprosopic with a facial index of 84%, meaning a medium face width. The Veddid phenotype on average has a 1.02 length to 1 width for their mid-face ratio, meaning that they have a compact mid-face, and they have full lips. They have a long philtrum of 1.9 chin length to 1 philtrum length, and a below average jaw size. The Veddid phenotype are very short in stature. Pictured here is a Vedda male on the left, and Jay Palfrey, a YouTuber on the right, who actually traveled to Sri Lanka to meet the Vedda tribe. Really interesting. I definitely recommend you check out his video. They are hyper-brachycephalic, meaning that they have very short torsos in relation to their limbs. You can actually see it here. This Vedda male's arm is incredibly long relative to his torso. His hand placement is near his knee. He'd be a great deadlifter. And finally, they're small-framed, though this guy does look like he has some muscle on him for sure. And so as we're gonna see here, the more masculine Veddid all the way over to the blend and then pretty boy counterparts, all attractive with differing levels of dimorphism. We go extensively detailed into it on my video, The Ultimate Guide to Looks Maxing for Your Masculinity. We now return to our map and move on to the Indo-Melanid phenotype chat, which is a dominant type among the southern Indian regions. The name Indo-Melanid is derived from the word melanin due to its association with darker skin pigmentation. However, as we will explore, there are numerous other ways in which this phenotype differs beyond just skin tone from the surrounding Indid and other phenotypes of the region. This phenotype is somewhat widespread, including the Tamil of southern India, mostly concentrated in the Indian subcontinent. Although genetically distinct, think of this group as sharing connections to both the previous Veddid group and the upcoming Indid phenotype. Rishi Sebastian Pillai is a Sri Lankan Tamil model. I mean, this guy is beautiful. Look at his side profile here. It's incredible. And the beautiful thing is we got so many pictures to work with, like the front here, incredible cheekbones, as well as a side profile. The caste system in India has historically shaped the lives of people across various regions and cultural groups, including those of the Indo-Melanid phenotype, such as the Dravidian populations, which include the Tamils and others. While individuals from these phenotypes can belong to both high and low castes, the system enforces rigid social hierarchies. These hierarchies have been maintained through centuries of endogamy, marriage within caste groups, leading to significant genetic and phenotypic differences, particularly between the Brahmins, the upper caste, and the Dalits, the lower caste. Brahmins, often associated with priestly and scholarly roles, show a higher genetic affinity with Indo-Aryans, who migrated to the Indian subcontinent thousands of years ago, linked to the ancient Indo-European migrations. In contrast, Dalits, historically marginalized and excluded from the caste system, exhibit more Dravidian and Indigenous South Asian ancestry. These genetic distributions are reflected in physical traits. Brahmins often have slightly fairer skin, sharper facial features, and taller stature, while Dalits are generally darker skinned with broader noses, rounder faces, and stockier builds. Within the Indo-Melanid phenotype, particularly in southern India, genetic differences between classes are less pronounced due to the region's predominantly Dravidian ancestry, which influences traits across castes. Southern Brahmins, for instance, often share more physical traits with the local Dravidian population, while some Dalits may display features overlapping with higher castes due to regional intermixing. Despite legal reforms and urbanization, these genetic and phenotypic distinctions shaped by millennia of cultural and geographic isolation continue to influence societal perceptions and reinforce caste-related inequalities across India. So here's a summarization of the caste system in India. I know this might look like an oversimplification, as it is. Now, the Indian caste system has two key components, the Varna and the Jati, which represent different levels of societal hierarchy. The Varna is a theoretical framework with four main groups. It's like a broad and conceptual way of defining the caste system, while the Jati is the detailed everyday implementation. On to the facial analysis of the Indo-Melanid phenotype Chad. Well, first of all, they have dark brown skin tone. In fact, it's often darker than the Veddid phenotype we previously analyzed. Secondly, they also have a high quantity of body hair with wavy hair texture, so it's not quite as curly as the Veddid group. This is likely due to Indo-Aryan exposure. Additionally, they have black hair color. Obviously, there can be a range with literally every single phenotypic trait here, so if you have a friend who has slightly blonde hair color from the Indo-Melanid phenotype, it happens. It's just much more rare. Additionally, they have dark brown eye color, and they typically have eye dimensions of 3.1 to 1, also being deep set. The Indo-Melanid phenotype rarely has epicanthic folds, and they on average have an eye spacing of 102% of one eye width apart and an ES ratio of 0.48. Indo-Melanid phenotype individuals often also have very large eyes. Moving on, they have a nasal index on average of 71, meaning that they have a mesorrhine nose, medium nose width. The Indo-Melanid is known for having moderate to high nasal projection. Pictured is Rishi. You can tell that his nose definitely goes out a decent amount, but nothing abnormally high. They have an orthocranic to hypsocranic skull height, meaning that they're slightly tall-skulled, and they're dolichocephalic to mesocephalic, meaning that they have a slightly deep skull appearance. Additionally, they're mesoprosopic with an 83% facial index, meaning that they have a medium face width. Additionally, they have a compact mid-face of 1:1 and relatively full lips. The Indo-Melanid has a balanced chin-philtrum ratio with a 2.3 chin length to 1 philtrum length, and they have good jaw development. Additionally, they're rather short in height and brachycephalic, like the Veddid, meaning that they have short torsos and longer limbs. And finally, the Indo-Melanid phenotype is small-framed. So we're gonna see the more masculine Indo-Melanid all the way over to the more pretty boy counterpart, both equally attractive in differing ways. Back to our subcontinent of India, moving on and flying into our Indid phenotype Chad, which is mostly concentrated on the Indian subcontinent. And then we're seeing the population here, boom, really sprawled across, but concentrated in those lower regions. Like, you're not seeing too much above the Himalayan mountain range. It's mostly concentrated on the Indian subcontinent, including the most eastern stands, notably Pakistan, and a bit of Afghanistan. Dr. Manu Bora is an orthopedic surgeon and an international model. I mean, this guy's an epitome of a Chad. He's famous, he's helping people with their back pain, and he just looks good while doing it. He's been on the I Am India magazine. Here's another one, Colorful India. While specific genetic details of Dr. Bora are not publicly available, his Indian heritage suggests a genetic makeup typical of North Indian populations, with features that align more closely with an Indo-Aryan appearance compared to the previous Indo-Melanid phenotype model. He has over 17 years of experience in his field and looks still so incredibly young. And our cultural photo here is wearing a ceremonial kurta, which is commonly worn at ceremonies and weddings. It is looser fitting compared to sherwani outfits. The Proto-Indo-Iranians, originating from Sintashta culture 2100 to 1800 BC, flourished in the Andronovo culture, which occurred 1800 to 1400 BC around the Ural Sea in present-day Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. This Andronovo population of Proto-Indo-Iranians moved down to settle the Indus Valley, which is labeled in brown, and these Aryan nomads came down and overtook the Indus Valley civilization around 1500 BC. Over time, this migration introduced a cultural transformation that laid the foundations for the caste system and the Indid phenotype. This represents present-day India and Sri Lanka, showing the distribution of major language families such as the Indo-Aryan, Dravidian, Tibeto-Burman, and Austro-Asiatic. It reflects the outcome of ancient migrations and interactions depicted in the first map, emphasizing how those movements shaped the current linguistic landscape. Again, the caste system also applies to the Indid phenotype. Please refer to my explanation in the previous section on the Indo-Melanid phenotype. On to the Indid phenotype Chad's analysis. First off, they have medium brown skin, which is notably much lighter than the Indo-Melanid phenotype Chad. Secondly, they also have a high quantity of body hair, and they have a hair texture which is straight to wavy. The Indid phenotype is known for having a dark brown hair color on average, with medium to dark brown eyes. However, one of my colleagues from school actually had blue eyes as an Indian. It does happen sometimes. They have deep set eyes with almond proportions of 3.2 width to 1 height. They rarely have epicanthic folding of the eye, and they have average eye spacing of 103% of one eye width apart on average, and an ES ratio of 0.47. They're also known for sometimes having larger eye size in relation to other phenotypes. Moving on, they have a slightly leptorine nose with a nasal index of 67, meaning that is slightly narrow, and they have high nasal projection. Pictured again is Dr. Manu Bora, a side profile showcasing the amount of projection projection of his nose being quite high. This is very similar to the Middle Eastern and European groups. They typically are orthocranic to hypsocranic, meaning they're slightly tall-skulled, and they're dolichocephalic to mesocephalic, meaning they're medium to deep-skulled. Indids typically have a facial index of 82%, meaning that they are mesoprosopic but close to the Uri-prosopic broad-faced category. Additionally, they have a compact mid-face of 1.1, and they have full lips. They have a balanced chin philtrum ratio of 2.2 chin length to 1 philtrum length, and they have average jaw development. The Indids are known for being medium in height and brachycephalic, like the previous two predominantly Indian phenotypes, meaning that they have a short torso. Finally, they're small-framed. We zoom out here, we're going to see the more masculine Indid all the way over to the more pretty boy counterpart. Both attractive in different and unique ways. Now we move on to the South Mongolid phenotype. One of the most populous phenotypes on Earth, has deep historical ties to China, originating from an early migration pattern that brought East Asians from the Chinese region southward. Before this migration, the regions of Thailand, Cambodia, and surrounding regions were predominantly inhabited by Austroasiatic peoples, who are among the earliest agricultural societies in Southeast Asia. Genetic and linguistic evidence indicates that the Austroasiatic groups share ancient connections to the ancestral South Indian populations, meaning that those regions likely got pushed down further into like the Oceania region during this expansion. Pine Takhan, a Burmese model, actor, and singer, is pictured here. He's a good example of this South Mongolid phenotype, possessing very attractive features. We can zoom in here. His trapezoidal jaw, really good hair density and all that. And then his side profile here as well. And then we move on to Tony Jaa, a Thai martial artist and actor. He's pretty good looking as well. He fits a more textbook look of the South Mongolid phenotype with a slightly wider nose. Here's some other shots. Here's him smiling. I like that jacket he has. It looks pretty awesome. And the hair. It looks like a kind of a retro style going on there. The South Mongolid phenotype spans across Southeast Asia, encompassing regions like the Philippines, Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia, Vietnam, and parts of Indonesia. Given this vast diversity, it's challenging to select a single cultural representation, so I'll highlight a variety of elements to better capture its richness. Kautapu, James Bond Island, in Alpengna National Park, Thailand. It's known for its appearance in the James Bond film The Man with the Golden Gun. I mean, it looks beautiful. Wat Arun, a stunning riverside Buddhist temple renowned for its intricate spires and beautiful illumination at sunset, symbolizing the radiance of dawn in Thai culture. I mean, it literally looks amazing. Moving on, we have a Thai male wearing Chong Krabin pants. This is a signature and cultural aspect of Thailand. Here's another wraparound attire that is commonly worn in Thailand and Cambodia. And here are Burmese men wearing paso, which is a long wraparound skirt, and a taikapon, which is a traditional long sleeve shirt. At first I wondered why the name Villa Escudero sounded Spanish. This is because the Philippines was a Spanish colony for over 300 years, from 1565 to 1898. During this time, Spanish influence deeply shaped Filipino culture, language, names, architecture, and traditions. Escudero is a Spanish surname that translates to squire or shield bearer. And here you can see their style differentiates a bit from the previous Myanmar and Thai cultures. While Vietnamese clothing, such as the Ao Zai, shows strong Chinese influence due to historical ties with China. Please note that Malaysia and Indonesia were covered in my previous video, The Ultimate Map to Male Facial Attractiveness, Oceania. This map right here highlights the two cultural barriers where traditional clothing styles in Southeast Asia undergo significant changes. Thailand, Cambodia, and Myanmar share similar traditional clothing due to their shared cultural and historical ties, including Theravada Buddhism and regional trade. Vietnam, on the other hand, has a much more Chinese influence. In contrast, Filipino attire like the barong Tagalog reflects Austronesian roots and Spanish influence. Super Tree Grove, which is in Singapore. The futuristic vertical gardens designed to mimic large trees are part of Singapore's initiative to integrate nature into its urban landscape. And then here you can see it at night. It looks absolutely fascinating. I would love to travel here one day simply to see this. And then we got the Singapore skyline cityscape. You can actually see them in the left corner right where my cursor is. That is so cool. So as we zoom in, we're gonna now get into the facial analysis of the South Mongolid phenotype. First of all, on average, they tend to have light to medium brown skin with a relatively yellow tint. Secondly, they do have a low quantity of body hair, and they have straight to slightly wavy hair texture and black hair color. The South Mongolid typically has dark brown eyes with middle set squinty eye proportions of 3.5 width to 1 height. Definitely on that squintier side, and this is partly attributed to the fact that they frequently have Mongolian or epicanthic folds. Epicanthic folding is the more scientific and appropriate term to use here. Additionally, they have an eye spacing of 120% of one eye width apart and an ES ratio on average of 0.46. The South Mongolid has a nasal index of 83, meaning they have a mesorrhine nose in most instances, medium nose width, and they have relatively low projection, pine tachon, and you can really see that project as far out as other phenotypes, but it isn't so flat either. Additionally, they're hypsocranic, meaning they're tall-skulled, and they're brachycephalic, meaning that they're shallow-skulled. They're euryprosopic with a facial index of 80%, meaning they have a relatively broad face, and they have a compact mid-face of 1.02 height or length to 1 width. That said, there's a wide range for East Asians. We're talking anywhere from about 0.925 to 1.075, meaning that if you fall anywhere in this range, it tends to look quite good. They have full lips with a slightly long philtrum of 2.1 chin length to 1 philtrum length. Furthermore, they typically have wide jaws, but they have soft definition, not overly angular, and they're relatively short in height, being mesoscalic, meaning that they have average torso length. Finally, they're small to medium framed. These southern Mongolid regions tend to have more gracile appearances due to a combination of neoteny and environmental adaptations. These features result from genetic expressions favoring youthful traits and likely adaptations to tropical climates. Back to our map. And now we're moving on to the Sinid phenotype, typically known as the phenotype of China and its surrounding regions. The Sinid phenotype is the dominant group in East Asia and the most numerous phenotype worldwide, which developed during the Neolithic era in China. It is most concentrated in the Yellow River Valley, often referred to as the cradle of Chinese civilization. Over time, the Sinid group expanded southward, contributing to the formation of the South Mongolid phenotype as discussed earlier. Generally, the Sinid group descends from the northern East Asian migratory branch of the Out of Africa movement, distinct from the previously discussed Southern Asian migratory branch that colonized southern India. In its early development, the Sinid phenotype was relatively isolated from trade and warfare due to natural barriers such as deserts, mountains, and oceans that surrounded the region during the beginnings of Chinese civilization. At this time, the Sinid phenotype was primarily concentrated around the Yellow River, pronounced Huangha, a vital area in what is now modern China. By around 5000 BC, villages in the wetlands of the Yangtze River, a separate river that is the longest in China and the third longest in the world, were cultivating rice. This marked the start of significant agricultural development in the region. During the same period, silk production also began to emerge as a valuable resource, laying the groundwork for future trade and economic growth. Here's another picture of Yellow River, which flows from the Tibetan Plateau through northern China to the Bohai Sea. As mentioned earlier, here's a picture of the Yuanyang rice terraces in Yunnan province, China. I apologize to my Chinese viewers if I'm pronouncing these things wrong, by the way. Anyone recognize this? This is the unique pillar-shaped rock formations which inspired the landscapes of Pandora, which is the world featured in Avatar. Zhangjiajia, National forest park in China. The Silk Road, established during the Han Dynasty, which was 206 BC to about 220 CE, began in Chang'an, modern-day Xi'an, and stretched through Gansu and Xinjiang, connecting China to Central Asia, the Mediterranean, and beyond. Initially a route for silk trade, it became a vital network for exchanging goods, ideas, technologies, and religions. The Sinid Phenotype's agrarian roots and adaptations to settled farming likely contributed to their success in creating this organized trade system. Godfrey Gao was a Taiwanese-Canadian model and actor celebrated as Asia's first male supermodel and the first male Asian model for Louis Vuitton. Born in Taipei to a Taiwanese father and a Chinese-Malaysian mother, he was raised in North Vancouver, Canada, where he attended Capilano University and played basketball at a staggering 6'4". Godfrey Gao tragically passed away from cardiac arrest in 2019 while filming a reality TV show in China, which is really sad. You can definitely see how handsome he is. He's definitely slightly on the more masculine side for the Sinid phenotype. And additionally, we have Choi Kwang-rock, also known as Roy, who is a South Korean actor and model born in 1991 in Daejeon, South Korea. Quite a good looking guy. I like the shirt, excellent smile. This is a tangsu, also pronounced as tangzuan, and is a traditional Chinese jacket often worn during cultural celebrations, weddings, and formal events. It features a mandarin collar, frog buttons, and intricate dragon embroidery, which symbolizes power and good fortune in Chinese culture. In minimalist, modern Chinese designs, incorporating a tie or accessory with dragon prints, traditional motives, or classical colors is often sufficient to convey cultural elements in a highly fashionable way, which is exactly what I did with this tie on the right here, which I think looks pretty awesome. Boom. So the Sinid phenotype typically has a fair to light brown skin tone, again with a yellow tint. This yellow tint tends to make people of this East Asian ethnicities appear a bit more tan than they actually are. Additionally, they have a low quantity of body hair, and they have coarse, straight hair. The Sinid phenotype typically is black hair and a dark brown eye color. Like I said before, the Sinid group primarily descended from the East Asian lineage, which has notably minimal genetic variation in pigmentation genes like OCA2 and HERC2, which strongly determine the brown eye color that we know today. The Sinid phenotype is known for having forward set eyes with squinty eye proportions of 3.3 width to 1 height, and a very pronounced epicanthic fold. They have average eye spacing of about 117.5% of one eye width apart, and an ES ratio of 0.465, meaning that they have slightly small eyes. Additionally, they have a nasal index of 68, meaning that they have a leptorine to mesorine nose, narrow to medium width typically. They have low nasal projection, notably lower than the South Mongolid phenotype, and they are mildly hypsocranic, meaning relatively tall-skulled. They're mesocephalic, medium-skulled, with a mesoprosopic 83% facial index, medium face width. They have a compact mid-face of 1.03 to 1, though there is again a very wide range notable for East Asians. In this case, anywhere from 0.95 to about 1.08 is optimal. They have an average lip size and a slightly long philtrum with a chin length typically of about 2 in relation to a philtrum length of 1. They have average jaw size, typically medium height, macroskeletal, meaning that they have short limbs and a long torso, another adaptation to cold environments, and they are small to medium framed. So now we got the more masculine all the way over to the blend, and then the more pretty boy Sinid phenotype. I mean, very attractive in differing ways. And yes, like if you were to travel to Korea or China, you would notice that a lot of the beauty standards are more tailored towards a more pretty looking person versus a more masculine. However, both are very attractive in unique ways. Now we move north to the Ainuid group. Now, the Ainu are original inhabitants of Japan. People assumed they were related to Europeans when in reality they weren't at all, and were simply a different ethnicity. The Ainu, indigenous to Hokkaido, southern Sakhalin, and the Kuril Islands, have a population estimated at 25,000, though unofficial figures exceed 200,000 due to assimilation. Linguistic evidence links them to the northern Hongshu and Russia's Amur region. So this photo photo was taken by Yamamoto Tatsuki, which showcases a high-status Ainu male, and you can really see how their unique robes, like they have these very fascinating geometric patterns. Like, look at that traditional attire right there. I think it looks incredible. Here's a picture of how a lot of the Ainu men had very long beards, and then the women would have these traditional mouth tattoos. All right, so on to the facial analysis of the Ainuid phenotype. They have a high quantity of body hair and very thick eyebrows. This is very much in contrast to many of the phenotypes in this surrounding region. They have wavy to curly hair. Again, that's very different from the coarse straight hair of many of these phenotypes. And they have black hair color on average. They have light to dark brown eyes, so there's a bit more variation here than the other East Asian phenotypes. And they have eye dimensions which are slightly forward set, though this is more like middle set in reality, with squinty eye proportions of 3.2 to 1. They have slightly less pronounced epicanthic folds, but they're still there, and a lower eye-eyebrow distance than many of the other surrounding ethnicities. They have average eye spacing of 108% of one eye width apart, and an ES ratio of 0.45, meaning that they have average eye spacing, and they have a nasal index on average of 83, meaning the upper end of the medium nose width category. They have moderate projection of the nose, though they have a depressed root. The root of the nose is the upper region here, so you can see it's quite flat, like they don't have a lot of projection, which is very common for many of the East Asian ethnicities. They typically have a flatter nose in this region. They're orthocranic, meaning that they have medium skull height. They're dolichocephalic to mesocephalic, meaning they're medium to deep skulled. And they're euryprosopic with an 82% facial index, meaning they have a broad face. They have a compact mid-face of 1:1, and they have relatively full lips. They have a balanced chin-philtrum ratio of 2.3 chin length in relation to the philtrum of 1, and they have great jaw development. Additionally, they're short in height and mesoscelic, meaning that they have an average torso length. Finally, they're medium to large framed and are quite good at gaining muscle. And so here's the more masculine Ainuid phenotype all the way over to the more pretty boy version, both very attractive in differing levels of dimorphism. Boom. So the Turanid phenotype, native to the steppes of Central Asia, which bridges Middle Eastern and East Asian populations due to its position at the crossroads of ancient migrations. This blending arose from historical movements across Central Asia, particularly through trade routes like the Silk Road and migrations from both East and West. Emerging in regions such as the Altai Mountains, Tian Shan, and Lake Baikal, the Turanid phenotype developed as northern East Asian groups mixed with Indo-Iranian peoples from the Andronovo culture and others. The Mongol expansion later reshaped this genetic landscape through widespread intermixing. Genetically, the Turanid phenotype traces back to the Northern Asian branch of the out of Africa migration, differing from the Sinid group slightly, which expanded southward from the Yellow River later on. Remaining in the northern steppe, the Turanid phenotype evolved through interaction with Indo-European and Siberian populations, resulting in a unique combination of West Eurasian and East Eurasian traits. The Turanid phenotype is often described as a transitional blend between these groups. And here we have Islam Karimov, the first president of Uzbekistan, who served from the nation's independence in 1991 until his death in 2016. Moving on, we have Shahbaz Makhmudov, who is an Uzbek model. I mean, this guy is so good looking. I find this guy to be a perfect example of the transitional appearance of the Turanid phenotype and ethnicity. Here's a side profile, and here's a smiling shot. Looks like he might be at the gym getting a workout in. Moving on, we got Turar here, who's a Kazakhstani model, and he's kind of fitting a more pretty boy look, but wow, is he ever good looking as well. Cigarettes are bad for you though. And then we got Dmitry Bival. He's a Russian professional boxer. However, it's worth noting that he's initially from Kyrgyzstan, so he's not ethnically Russian. Boom. So you can see a zoomed in picture of his face here. There's him doing the splits. That is impressive. Turanid regions, including Turkmenistan, there is a strong emphasis on traditional handmade rugs, such as Turkoman rugs. Furthermore, telpeks, which are fur hats, often white in color, are commonly worn. Please note, this is an AI-generated photo. Moving on, the Turanid phenotype has a light brown skin tone, and they have moderate to high quantity of body hair with frequent unibrows. They have straight to wavy hair on average, and brown to black hair color. Additionally, they have hazel to dark brown eye color, so there's a wider range here, and they have middle set squinty eye proportions of 3.3 width to 1 height. They have less pronounced epicanthic folds in comparison to some of the other phenotypes of East Asia, and they have average eye spacing of 105% of one eye width apart, and an ES ratio of 0.46. They have a nasal index of 67, meaning they have a slightly narrow nose width, and they have moderate nasal projection with a nose which is sometimes convex. As we noted earlier with one of our previous models, you could tell that he did have like a slightly hooked nose. This is common because there's some of that Middle Eastern influence. Additionally, they're mildly hypsocranic, meaning they're slightly tall in skull height, and they're brachycephalic on average, meaning that they're shallow skulled, with a meso to euryprosopic facial index of about 83%, slightly broad face. They have a compact mid face of 1.02 to 1, and they have rather thin lips. They have a large chin on average with a chin philtrum ratio of 2.5 to 1, and they have good jaw development, medium to tall in height, and they're mesoscelic, meaning that they have an average torso length. Finally, they're small to large frame, meaning that there's a wide range of body types present for this phenotype. Moving on, we have the more masculine Turanid all the way over to the more pretty boy counterparts. Differing levels of dimorphism, but all attractive. Boom. Moving on, we fly all the way over to the Tungid phenotype. Wow. Incredibly widespread. Spans all the way from Gobi Desert to the Siberian taiga and tundra. It emerged during the Neolithic as nomadic peoples adapted to the harsh climates of the steppes after the Ice Age. Diverging from other East Asian groups during the out-of-Africa migration, the Tungid phenotype moved northward, developing traits like shorter limbs, broader faces, and stronger, more obvious epicanthic folds to endure the cold and conserve heat. That said, in many ways, they do resemble the Sinid type facially. Tengiz is a Mongolian model, which I found from Mongol Model Official on Instagram. Very good looking guy, and he definitely fits the Tungid phenotype to some degree. Here's another photo of him with a beautiful backdrop. Diving into the culture of the Tungid phenotype, after the collapse of the Han Dynasty, the Silk Route's activity declined due to political instability. The fragmentation of empires and lack of centralized control also had a role in this. It was later revived and significantly expanded during the Mongol Empire between the 13th and the 14th centuries, when Genghis Khan and his successors created a vast, unified territory that facilitated safer and more efficient trade. This period, often referred to as the Pax Mongolica, allowed the Silk Road to flourish once again, with Marco Polo famously traveling along it during its revitalized era. So moving on into the facial analysis of the Tungid phenotype. So they have fair to light brown skin with a yellow tint, very similar to the Sinid phenotype. They have a low quantity of body hair and a hair texture which is coarse and straight. It's black in color, and they have dark brown eyes. Their eye dimensions are forward set with squinty eye proportions of 3.4 width to 1 height, and they have very pronounced epicanthic folds. I mean, this is the most pronounced out of all these East Asian phenotypes. They have 125% of one eye width apart and an ES ratio of 0.45, meaning that they have slightly close-set eyes which are small in size overall. We have to obviously recognize the fact that there's immense variability in all these factors, meaning that this is on average. They have a nasal index of 77, meaning that they have a mesorine to sometimes leptorine nose, relatively medium, and they have a nasal projection which is low. They're chemicranic on average, meaning that they're short-skulled, and they're hyperbrachycephalic, meaning they're very shallow-skulled. Additionally, they're euryprosopic with an 80% wide, broad-face facial index, and they have a compact mid-face of 1.03 to 1, though again, this is a very wide range for East Asians. Anywhere from 0.925 to 1.075 looks great for the Tungid phenotype. They have relatively full lips, and they have a long philtrum with a 1.8 chin length to 1 philtrum length. They have a wide soft jaw, and they're medium in height. Macroscelic, meaning they have short limbs and a long torso, and they're large framed with a relatively large head on average. So we're gonna go all the way from the more masculine Tungid all the way over to the more pretty boy version, both equally attractive with differing levels of dimorphism. One thing to note is the South Mongolid phenotype name is less correlated with Mongolia than the Tungid phenotype. The Tungid phenotype is far more connected to Mongolia. Moving on, we fly all the way over to Siberia, notably the Sibirid Phenotype Chad. The Sibirid phenotype is primarily found amongst indigenous Siberian populations. While its numbers are limited today, it was more spread during the Mesolithic era. Over time, its range was reduced by successive migrations and expansions. The Neolithic push of Northern Mediterranean groups, the Tungid expansion, likely during the Mongol Empire, and more recently, East European colonization with the arrival of modern-day Russians. This is why there's a high level of fragmentation of this group, unfortunately. It's challenging to pinpoint the specifics of the Sibirid phenotype due to excessive waves of these migrations, expansions, and contractions throughout history. There are many branches of Siberian peoples today, far more than the estimated population of the pure Sibirid phenotype, which likely spans numbers in the low thousands. This is due to significant intermixing with various other phenotypes over time, as we mentioned earlier, including the Europid or Uralid, Tungid, Ainuid, and Sinid groups, each associated with different migrations into different regions and so on. The Paleo-Siberians, specifically the Chekatko-Kamchatkan peoples, are likely the closest living representatives of this phenotype in its purest form. Among surviving Siberian ethnic groups, this people, such as the Chukchi and Koryaks, remain the least admixed, retaining strong genetic and cultural ties to Mesolithic and Neolithic Siberians. However, seen on a previous population map, due to admixture, this phenotype does technically stretch across this entire region. This is an incredible map here, showcasing all the different branches of indigenous peoples of North Siberia and the far east of the Russian Federation. I think it's pretty cool and is color-coded by general related groups. This area here outlined in red are the more traditional looking Sibirid phenotype peoples. Here's a Chukchi group, and here they are singing. You can also see that they're wearing much warmer clothing because it's absolutely frigid in these regions. Very harsh climates. And here's a Koryak traditional dance photo. Excellent. So on to the facial analysis of our final Asian phenotype. First of all, they have a light brown skin tone which has a yellowish reddish tint. They have a low quantity of body hair, and they have straight to wavy hair texture. Their hair color can range anywhere from brown to black, and they have amber to dark brown eye color, so there's a bit of a range here as well. They have forward set, squinty eye proportions on average of a 3.2 width to 1 height. They have pronounced epicanthic folds. The Sibirid phenotype has average eye spacing, yet small eye size, with 118% of one eye width apart, eye spacing, and an ES ratio of 0.455. They have a nasal index on average of 70, meaning that they're mildly leptorine, slightly narrow nose, and low projection of the nose overall from the side view. They're chemicranic to orthocranic, meaning they're short to medium skulled, and they're mesocephalic, sometimes brachycephalic, meaning that they're medium to shallow skulled. Additionally, they're euryprosopic with a 78% facial index. They do have relatively broad faces on average, and they have a relatively compact mid-face of 1.04 to 1. There's a bit of a wide range yet again for East Asians here. They have relatively full lips, and they have a long philtrum on average of 1.7 chin length to 1 philtrum length. They have great jaw development. They're short. They're macroscelic, meaning that they have short limbs and a long torso. Again, an adaptation to the cold climate that they had to endure. And they're large-framed and muscular. Here we go, all the way from the more masculine blend and then pretty boy version of the Sibirid phenotype Chad. Very attractive, of course, all of them. I want to emphasize that this is solely my personal perspective on these topics. While I strive to research and understand these complex concepts thoroughly, achieving complete accuracy is virtually impossible. This is not a hard science. Anthropology straddles the line between soft and hard science. As a result, these topics can often end up intertwined with political agenda, discrimination, or class-based biases, which I firmly reject. This channel will remain apolitical and unbiased, free from any left or right-leaning slant. At the same time, I recognize that this endeavor is as much an art as it is a science, with an inevitable interplay of subjectivity within an objective framework when combining facial attractiveness analysis with human biology. This topic is a very, very complicated topic. Without some form of genetic information, it can be tremendously difficult to pinpoint your exact ethnicity. Our approach embraces a unity gradient model, recognizing that phenotypic traits exist on a continuum rather than as rigid categories, while also acknowledging that distinctions do in fact exist. For example, geographic and land barriers such as the Himalayan mountains have led certain groups to develop more distinct features due to geographic isolation for lengthy periods of time. To illustrate our phenotype-based application functions by aligning individuals with multiple phenotypes at varying percentages. This is because most people on this planet are mixed and contain multiple different phenotypes. And what makes this analysis unique is that the ranges for specific traits dynamically adjust as these percentages are modified. Ironically, at a first glance, the software may appear to use boxes. It operates fundamentally as a continuum model, reflecting the complexity and fluidity of human ethnicity. For example, someone who is 80% Armenian and 20% Ethiopian will have a unique range of values on this continuum, literally tailored to that specific blend. Now consider a hypothetical individual who is 1/4 Congolese, 1/4 Nilotic, 1/4 Mediterranean, and 1/4 Persian. If this individual inherited a higher proportion of traits influenced by dominant alleles, often observed in many African ethnicities, these percentages could be weighted more heavily, say 30% or more for each African phenotype, rather than being constricted to fixed percentages or a single group. This approach highlights the true complexity and fluidity of human ethnic diversity. My software is specifically designed to embrace this diversity, dynamically adapting to reflect the rich and nuanced reality of human variation. At Chatify, we recognize the beauty of the world. Anyone can be attractive from anywhere in the world. We're going to zoom out now. This is a vast continent, and it was very difficult to cover in one video. So what we're going to do here is compare their morphological phenotypic traits, the observable traits. And we got a special visitor here who is none other than the stereotypical Chad. I am by no means stating that the stereotypical Chad is optimal, but I'm rather using it as a reference point to understand how different some of these people look in comparison. So first of all, we do have skin color. Obviously, there's a bit of nuance here. The Indo-Melanid and the Veddid phenotype, third and fourth from the left, who are the darkest skinned phenotypes on average. But then if you move over, you can see like the Sinid, the Tungid, even the Turanid to some degree are a little bit yellow on their edges. And that's because they have a slightly yellow tint to their skin, resulting in a slightly more tanned appearance despite having lighter skin tone. Furthermore, you got the Sibirid has an orange tint. That is because of that red yellow skin color that they tend to have. Body hair, boom. The Indid, Indo-Melanid, and Veddid are just the highest amount. That's the Indian subcontinent region with also relatively Austroasiatic influence. The Ainuid phenotype is definitely a bit of an outlier here for East Asia with higher body hair. All the other East Asians typically have very, very little body hair. Moving on, hair texture, we're seeing that many of the ethnicities in Asia have very straight, coarse hair, but that there's a bit of a range once we move over to the Indian subcontinent or the Turanid phenotype encompassing all the different stans. And then as we move over to the Ainuid, the Sibirid, and the stereotypical Chad, again, there's a range and there's much more curls going on there. Hair color, boom. So less range here. Obviously, we all know people from different phenotypes that don't fit these classifications exactly, but the Indid phenotype and the Turanid phenotype, as well as the Siberian phenotype, have the most variance. The rest of them typically do have black hair color. Eye color, boom. Again, most of them are collectively across the dark brown region, but there is some range depending on like if you're the Turanid phenotype, even the Indid phenotype, Ainuid, Siberian, so on. Moving on, eye dimensions. I guess you can expect what's gonna happen here, but most of the phenotypes are on the squintier side of the spectrum due to their epicanthic folding. In a similar vein, we see here that the Mongolid phenotypes do have a very high prevalence of epicanthic folding, but there are hooded eyes apparent in many of these groups still. That's different from epicanthic folding. Their eye spacing is very nuanced here. Most of them are all around that average eye spacing, with some that are slightly closer set. That said, the ones with the dotted line, these phenotypes typically have slightly small eye size. So despite medium spacing or average spacing, their eyes are still a little bit different than, like, say, the stereotypical Chad of Europe or something. Nasal index, boom. So a wide variance here for everybody. Like, this range is typically quite large, but you can see that the Tungid, the Ainuid, the South Mongolid, and even the Veddid phenotypes typically do have a bit more wider noses than the other phenotypes here, and there is a bit of a wide range. Having a wider nose typically is an adaptation to heat. Nasal projection, Indids and stereotypical Chads notably have the most. The Indid phenotype has historical ties to the Indo-Aryan group, and they did have high nasal projection historically, hence why it's like this. But then you can see how, as you kind of work your way to the more traditional East Asian phenotypes, how it gets flatter. Skull breadth, this one has a massive range, so don't take it as it has to be an end-all be-all here. It's just never been that constant in populations. That said, you can see that some of them are a bit wider than others. Mid-face ratio, again, there's a wide range for the Asian phenotypes. They typically have more elongated or shortened mid-faces than other phenos. Lip size, most of these phenotypes have like relatively full or average lip size. Moving over, you can see that the trend is the one outlier with thinner lips. Then we got chin philtrum ratio, again a bit of a range everywhere, but some phenotypes have a slightly more masculinized, higher chin philtrum ratio as opposed to others. Height, this is one of those traits where there is a legitimate range in many cases. Like the Veddid phenotype, they simply are much shorter in comparison, and it's not just because of like culture or the food, it's rather an adaptation to being confined initially on a relatively small island being Sri Lanka. And then finally, frame, again there's a bit of range for the Ainuid and the Turanid, but the rest of the phenotypes typically have like I don't really like the word ectomorphic because anyone can gain muscle, but small framed in general, all the way up to the Sibirid. Colder phenotypes typically do have bigger frames, suitable for gaining muscle and fat. After investing more than 6 months into research and development, my initial vision of creating a singular, comprehensive video on ethnicity became impractical. We're gonna have to break this series up into multiple parts. The ultimate map to male facial attractiveness. Thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.